Okay, so what I wanted to talk today about is Suge Knight. And I know it's not popular to say anything positive or nice about Suge Knight. But I kind of wanted to just give you guys a little bit of background about my interactions with the Suge Knight team. And I also wanted to talk to you about Russell Poole. And towards the end of Russell Poole's life, he realized that Suge Knight, sitting next to Tupac, could not possibly be involved in Tupac's murder. Now, he also realized that it would be very, very difficult to ever convict Suge Knight of the Biggie Smalls murder. At the time, Suge Knight was in the LA County Jail, and he was being treated very harshly. And it would be very, very difficult to tie Suge Knight to the Biggie Smalls murder. Now, there is a witness in prison that the government put next to Suge, and Suge relayed exactly what happened in the Biggie Smalls murder. And we have that witness statement. And so Suge definitely knew what happened to Biggie. And that had been relayed to him by Reginald Wright Jr. And so that was why Russell felt that Suge was involved in the Biggie Smalls murder. And there were a lot of anonymous callers that were giving leads to LAPD, and everything pointed to Suge. And Russell, at the time of his death, wanted to apologize to Suge Knight. And if you look at the Tupac and Biggie film, Russell is publicly calling out Suge and calling him a murderer and saying that he's behind these murders. And when Russell realized that Suge Knight was not behind these murders, he felt bad and he wanted to apologize to Suge Knight. And I set up a meeting for Russell to go to the sheriff's, and Russell died in that meeting trying to reopen the Tupac and Biggie murders. And he was trying to get Suge Knight to cooperate in a couple of cases that were going to make the sheriff shine, and give up 2 dog cases that would embarrass the sheriffs, because Russell and I had found out that there was an off-duty sheriff that let the shooters into the One Oak nightclub the night Suge Knight was shot, and that shooting was precipitated by the release of the confession letter by Greg Kading, Darren Dupree, and Anton Beatty. And when the shooters shot Suge Knight that night at One Oak, they yelled, "You killed Tupac." So this was further going to galvanize the Suge Knight was behind the Tupac murder. And that was something that was orchestrated at a higher level by the higher order. We talked about the higher order, to take out Suge and to blame him for the murder of Tupac Shakur. And so this entire narrative was trying to be reinforced and galvanized by shooting Suge Knight. And so I had reached out to Tom Mesereau when he was representing Suge. I sent him a letter. I sent him the letter that I sent to Police Chief Charlie Beck and the 45 Tupac murder facts, along with the confession letter. And I got a phone call back from Thaddeus Culpepper, and he told me that Tom had read this letter to Suge, and that Suge had verified that the information was correct. And then Russell had a subsequent conversation with Thaddeus Culpepper about Suge, and Russell put that into an affidavit, which he emailed to me. And this was, really a month or so before Russell died. And when that information came to light with the sheriffs, I don't think they were too happy. Russell was telling them that they had a conflict of interest. Russell didn't like Officer Biddle, and Biddle was somebody he had dealings with in the past. Russell didn't think that that Biddle was a good police officer, and Russell had told me, he said that it's a huge conflict of interest for Biddle to be working on the Tams case where Suge is a victim. I mean, really he's a victim in both cases, but working on the Tams case where Suge is charged with a crime, and working on the 1-0 case where Suge Knight is a victim and is shot. And it's a clear conflict of interest, and the sheriffs definitely were pissed off because they didn't want Russell Poole telling them how to do their business. And so Russell dies in that meeting with the sheriffs, which is highly suspect. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. There has since been somebody come forward who's given information, and at some point that information is definitely going to surface about Russell Poole's death. So that's a teaser for the future. But I'll tell you this much. With Suge Knight's case, I continue to stay in touch with Suge Knight's team, and let's just call it Suge Knight's team. That way we don't get into the specifics of who that meant. And it was a revolving, all kinds of different chairs of people coming and going in Suge Knight's team. But I stayed involved, and I was in touch with certain people that are related to Suge Knight, and we'll leave it at that. I don't need to get into any names. But what I'm going to tell you now is what happened the last month or so, maybe a little more than a month or so before Suge Knight took his plea deal. Suge wanted to have a second opinion from another attorney about the plea deal. And so I found an attorney that wanted the case. Okay? That attorney was in touch with some of Suge Knight's relatives and was arranging for a visit to confer with their client. Okay? That information was passed on the inside to Mr. Knight, and he was awaiting a visit from this attorney for the second opinion on the plea deal. Okay? This attorney and I had lunch, and he talked about exactly what happened, because I was trying to orchestrate this so that he could get this second opinion. The attorney called over to the jail and said, "Hey, I'd like to confer with my client." "No problem, come down here." So the attorney goes down to the jail, and when he gets there, he's told, "Hey, I'm so sorry, I can't let you see your client. You're going to have to go fill out this form, and you're going to have to get it over to this room at the courthouse. And once we have that form, then you can go see your client." So he goes over to that room at the courthouse. He gets the form. He goes back to his office. He has his secretary call over to the clerk at the court to get the number to fax it back, and gets the form all signed up and everything. And the clerk goes to fax it back, and her number is now blocked from being able to fax the form back. And so the assistant tries to call over to the room or the form, whatever, and now her number is blocked and cannot call. So the attorney walks the form back to this room where it's supposed to be filed, and he's told, "We're so sorry, you're going to have to go over and you're going to have to see the judge." So he makes arrangements, goes over and sees the judge in the case. And when he sees the judge says, "I'm so sorry, I cannot let you see Mr. Knight." Okay? And so the judge directs him to the DA's office. Okay? And keep in mind, the clock is running out. And so the next thing he does is he goes to the DA's office. And the DA's office says, "Hey, we can't let you see him. And so they block him from seeing Mr. Knight. And so it comes time for the plea to actually get entered, and this attorney is called by another court, another judge, with a mandatory appearance that he has to make in another case that he's working on, and he is no longer able to show up at Suge's hearing where he enters the plea. He's been completely blocked from giving Mr. Knight his second opinion that he had requested. And so the plea gets entered, and the way that the plea gets entered is so meticulously done that it's going to be impossible for this to be appealed. And so now this becomes a civil rights case because Suge Knight's civil rights have been violated in this case. And that's the story of my involvement with this. And, you know, I've been digging into other cases that are related to this Death Row Records thing, okay? The corrupt cops, the Rampart Scandal cops, the, Tupac and Biggie murders, the Vikings, the Compton police corruption that was going on. And so I've got a total of 6 cases that I've been collecting information and paperwork on. And over the coming weeks, we're going to talk about the Tupac Biggie murders, but we're also going to be talking about these 6 cases because these are people who are in prison and they may not be innocent completely, just like Suge, okay? Suge is not innocent by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not guilty of the crime that he has been charged with, okay? And that's an important distinction because the way I say it is this: if Suge Knight can get a fair trial in America, then that means everybody can get a fair trial in America. But if Suge Knight cannot get a fair trial in America, then nobody can get a fair trial. And every one of you needs to be outraged about this. Does Suge Knight have a bad reputation? 100%. He's known as being a really horrible person, right? For all of these things that he allegedly did. Allegedly dangling Vanilla Ice over the balcony, getting people to drink pee. All of these things that he's been accused of taking Kevin Gaines and Sharitha to a hole in the desert just before Tupac and Suge get shot. I mean, these are all horrific things that he's accused of, but you know what? If he's guilty of them, then charge him and convict him of those things. The rumor mill that goes on around this man is no reason not to give him a fair trial. And the judge and the district attorney and even his own public defender and criminal defense attorney that ended up representing him in this plea deal, you know, they really didn't have Suge Knight's best interest at heart. They denied him from getting a second opinion before he signed his plea deal, and he had no choice but to take this plea. And we're going to dig into more and more of this. There is definitely a lot more information coming in the coming weeks about this, and I appreciate all of you. These are chaos merchants. The reason, Russell and I were looking for a great title for a book, and it was one of those things we would text each other back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and we talked about the LA Hit Squad, we talked about all kinds of titles that we would float, and it was kind of one of those things that was like between us. And we finally settled on chaos merchants because these are merchants of chaos that are putting out disinformation to obscure the truth. And it happened with the Tupac and Biggie murders, both of them. There were instantly all of these basically publicity stunts to put out information. There was a publicity stunt to put out information that Tupac was alive. There was a publicity stunt to create this East Coast, West Coast war and sell more records. And there was even this whole thing that Biggie was responsible for Tupac's murder. Reginald himself said that he was going to get Biggie for killing Tupac. And so we have these lies that get spread about these murders, and it's all chaos. They're chaos merchants spreading these lies to confuse people so that they don't get to know the truth. More later.